Universal childcare is good. Buses being free is good. Trans rights are human rights. And if you disagree with any of that, this is gonna be awkward for you. I admire your bravery. Enjoy. مرحبا، أنا اسمي إيليا أيوب وعم رشح حالي لأكون ملك البودكاست. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Fire These Times. If you don't speak Arabic, you don't get to laugh at that. I'm sorry, that's how the rules go. How are you?
I'm good. It's been an okay week, American speaking.
It has been an okay week. Non-American speaking, but even for me. We will be talking about Mamdani's victory, the election, of course, as mayor of New York City. As someone who's literally never been to New York City, I was very excited about it. We will talk about that as well. Like it is the global impact of it all, impact on UK potential lessons. I think for UK politics, we'll bring that up as well because I think it's interesting and relevant. But we will also speak about the whole the Israel-Palestine angle of it all, because very much despite him in many ways, it has been made partly at the very least into one related to Israel, like an election related to Israel-Palestine. The way he turned it into how he dealt with it, I would like to talk about because that's very interesting. And of course, the way he focused on affordability is a lesson that is also very, very useful, but we'll get into that later. Let's just start with your reflections as someone who is obviously in the US, as an American, as a Muslim American, as a whatever,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
reflections.
So as a Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, American. So first and foremost, November 4th, that election night, as much as people want to be cynical about electoral politics, was incredibly heartening. The
Mm.
turnouts, just generally across the United States. In the state I live in Virginia, every county trended blue.
Yeah.
That's an amazing thing to witness, and I think it speaks to the fact that there is a great deal of anger around fascism. I mean, it's so simple, but they are trying to convince us over and over that they are the majority of the country. They're trying to convince us over and over that most Americans are fine. And I think as Americans recognize what this actually means, what the Trump administration's policies mean, it's extremely heartening to see that they don't think it's fine and that they are turning out for their neighbors and showing up at the polls. And the showing up at the polls doesn't happen, overnight. There's been a lot of people who have been active to ensure this outcome. And in New York City, we saw, the entire weight of the establishment crashing down on Mamdani, attempting to crush his campaign, and he still won. I can tell you, I'm exactly Zohran's age. I'm like two
Me too.
months. Yeah,
I'm 4 months older than him, which is really
I
annoying.
yeah, I know, me too. I'm 3 months older than him. I'm just like, that's inappropriate of you. So let me tell you, he lived the same America I lived.
Mm.
Apparently, he came around the same time I came, and I have so much war on terror trauma from this political system. I came to political awareness as a result of the Second Intifada, as a result of the invasion of Iraq. My childhood was colored with understanding the George Bush administration was entrapping people in mosques. The George Bush
Mm.
administration was, engaging in extraordinary rendition, torture. As a overly anxious child slash teenager, I thought it would happen to me.
Hmm.
Nobody was, of course, nobody cared about, my 11-year-old ass at that point. But still, I was extremely, impacted by those dynamics. And of course, the entire Arab and Muslim community in the United States was. So the fact that Zahrani Mamdani won, ironically, on the same day that Dick Cheney died, it's just interesting. I'll just put
Yeah.
it that. Yeah.
No,
So.
you mentioned the weight of the establishment. I mean, just to write a few things just for and this I wrote this like 4 days ago, so I don't even know if this is like worse since because what I wrote based on the research I did is despite Trump's threats to punish the city, despite Cuomo receiving over $22 million at least, this
Mhm.
is the data is from 4 days ago, so I don't know if it's more than that. from 20 or so billionaires. 20.
Jeez.
And of course, despite like, the hit pieces, the New York Times of it
The
all of that stuff, like
Islamophobia, yeah.
the xenophobia, the Islamophobia, the way they crank things up, especially in like the last week or so. Cuomo saying like, Mamdani was fine with 9/11 or some shit like that. There was a leaflet or leaflets that were distributed in Yiddish
Hmm.
across some boroughs of New York. Our mutual friend Molly Crabapple and friend of the show shared it on Instagram, basically saying in Yiddish that like, if Mamdani wins, there'll be another Holocaust. Like
Mm.
it got ugly very, very, very quick. And I mean, there's no
Hmm.
reason to believe it won't still be ugly in many ways. But still, as you said, highest turnout since the 1960s. And sure, all of the caveats about electoralism, this is still a very significant thing. I think this is undeniable. Um, the way I have been approaching this personally as like my connection is not, as I said, I've never been to New York. I'm not American. I live in the UK as a non-Muslim Arab. You will not be shocked to know that people who hate Muslims don't know about
Of course,
non-Muslim
yes.
Arabs. It doesn't matter
Unfortunately,
basically.
you're with us. I'm sorry to tell you.
I'm with you guys. Uh, um, It was no, it was absolutely incredible thing. The impact I genuinely think will be felt here, or already in many ways, but they will be felt here. Um, Very likely the biggest beneficiary will be the Green Party, which
Mm.
has, I think, proven itself. And caveat here, I am someone who has actually left Labour and joined the Green Party, so this is coming from a biased source. But I think has shown itself to be the actually left-wing alternative to the status quo, because the Labour Party, which was supposed to be that, is very much not that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, we'll get into that more later. And the fact that you have someone like Zach Polanski kind of being even talked about as like, is this the next British Mamdani and whatnot,
Right.
already
Yeah.
speaks
Yeah.
to like the fact that it's a mayoral election in one city, right? And it is being talked about as like, is this guy the next Mamdani for an entire country?
Mm.
Like this
Hmm.
this is how much like it has been turned into. I mean, New York is New York, so the influence of it is maybe
Of course,
inevitable,
the heart
but
of empire. Yeah.
the Heart of Empire, but also like just the way the attacks against Mamdani made this into the
That's
election.
right.
I may have never, I may have never been as involved, let's say, or invested, emotionally invested in following New York politics. I have friends there, sure, and all of that, but it maybe wouldn't have necessarily been as significant as it ended up being,
Hmm.
were it not for just the sheer animosity and the insane amount of like finance and whatnot that went just trying to stop this one guy who would like universal childcare and free buses and just like these kind of policies, no foreign policy anyway for like if a mayor or whatever, but it got turned into one, especially
Hmm.
when it comes to Israel, of course. So yeah, like that's what made it for me like very significant, and I think there will absolutely be this whatever people are gonna call Mamdani effect or whatever. Um, and I don't think it's unreasonable to say that like in at least within like democratic politics, as in like the Democratic Party politics in the US, who he or the people around him or whatnot start endorsing is gonna be actually a big thing, maybe even bigger than someone like Schumer or Pelosi or
Oh,
whatever at this point because they're like the old guard, you know?
of course. No, I mean, I think I mean, you would know better about kind of the UK implications, but like you said, because of what his mayoral campaign and like his victory would represent. It's not just about they added the Israel-Palestine element, and I'd like to talk about that,
Yeah.
more specifically, but really it's about the fact that this guy and the people around him come from an ideological perspective that refuses billionaire intervention in
Yeah.
politics. Like
Yeah.
like somebody like Mamdani is refusing to meet with the billionaires and they cannot take it. And
Hmm.
the reason why, I mean, yes, of course, New York City, one of the biggest city in the United States, and obviously like has a huge impact on politics and culture. But really, the what this shows is the ramifications for the Democratic Party. And he's been very clever about it and very smart about it. And it's, I mean, it's not, hidden. He was campaigning with AOC. He was doing these video clips with Bernie Sanders. And
Hmm.
those people, I mean, Bernie is very old, but like the AOC has like Senate ambitions.
Hmm.
The fact that like Mamdani wins has kind of this effect across politics in the entire country. And the Chuck Schumers and the Hakeem Jeffries and, all of them, they have proven both to their own party and, to the larger country that like they are morally bankrupt and cannot be the future of the party. I think that does increase pressure on them. I think and it's going to have implications for politics moving forward. But yeah, I really think it's the billionaire impact on politics that Mamdani rejected, that got them all in a tizzy. And that's why they wanted to make a big deal out of the fact that he was Muslim and the fact that he had campaigned for Palestine. And that, like, even though, like you said, like, it really wasn't at the forefront of anything he did.
Yeah, no, he was just good at knowing what to do in a situation. Clearly was prepared for these questions were coming. Like he knew that this framing was going to happen. The fact that just a day or two before the election itself, he released this campaign video in Arabic.
مرحبا، أنا اسمي زهران ممداني وعم رشح حالي ليكون العمدة الجديد في مدينة نيويورك. بعرف شو عم تفكروا، شكلي كأني سهركم من الشام، بس العربي تبعي بده شوية شغل. مع هيك أنا حابب اليوم أطلب دعمكم يوم 4 نوفمبر. العيشة بنيويورك صارت غالية.
As someone who, again, at best, I am like skeptical of electoralism and campaign, whatever. They are what they are, but because like you can have easily had that point of view that like maybe it's too if you are to do something like that, like don't do it just before the election, like it's risky or whatever. Especially given that the Cuomo side has been using, all of the Islamophobic smears and tropes and whatever. But he did, and that's just what it was. His victory speech itself, of course, like he said, like, what did he say again? أنا منكم واليكم.
We will fight for you because we are you. Or as we say on Steinway, أنا منكم واليكم.
I also grew up in the era of war on terror. Obviously, I grew up in Lebanon, of course, but my like I took for granted in many ways because of my age and the same age as Mamdani, as we said, that this is just the way of Western politics. Like Islamophobia expected, racism expected. Even I think to the point like it doesn't even shock me, although some of the stuff that Cuomo did say did eventually even cross that line because like the standards are that low. But it's almost like a gamble or whatever that his campaign and himself obviously decided to do of like just no compromises on very basic things. Like it should not be taboo, to even say the word, Arabic words out loud, stuff like that.
Yeah.
As someone who is growing up in like who has a kid now who's going to grow up in the West, speaking Arabic is not neutral, right? Like it's just not this. It's not as neutral as, I don't know, speaking Italian or whatever, which isn't to say that like xenophobes wouldn't go after Italian speakers necessarily, but like it's not as present in their minds necessarily. As like I do think twice of whether my kid should have an Arabic book, on the bus versus an English one, stuff like that. And that is the result of those 20 plus years of growing up in this era of the, post 9/11, all of that shit. And the heart of that has been New York, obviously. Giuliani, the obviously 9/11 being there and stuff. And in my mind, it's like I couldn't. There's been like this. I can only describe it as like some form of cognitive dissonance, which is like anything related to me or my world or who I come from or whatever cannot intersect with that world publicly. Can do so privately, sure, friends, families, connections, whatever, but not like publicly, right? And he just did. Just
Yeah.
did it. It just, and it was fine, it's not a thing that won him, whatever, it's the affordability policies, all of that, but it didn't harm it either, and that's what's incredible to me.
I mean, I think that I'm also not an expert in American politics necessarily or like New York mayoral politics, but it seems to me just from following the campaign kind of as a stand from a distance, like he was extremely intersectional about his campaign, about which communities he reached out to. He genuinely seems to love the city. Arabs are a huge part of the city. And like it's actually like abnormal and you know outrageous that for all these years these politicians, whether in New York City or in broader America, thought that they didn't have to answer to their Arab constituents. And he basically was, yes, you're right that like he took a gamble. His campaign took a gamble and said, we think turnout is going to be, something we gamble on. And you can only have people turn out if they really believe in this campaign, if they really believe in this candidate. And so they leaned in with Islamophobia. They still put out that Arabic one. And I love the fact that he was like speaking Syrian because of his wife.
Except when he spoke to the cat, he
To
spoke
the cat,
Egyptian Arabic.
Egyptian, yeah, that's
So
right. I
amazing.
did notice that. I just thought that was, a stylistic choice. But yeah, I mean, I think there is that gamble, but it worked because he was able to reach a lot of different communities. And can I just say, this is something that Peter Barnard just wrote for Jewish
hmm
Currents, and I can send you the link to put in the show notes. But
hmm
he also he reached out to and engaged with liberal Zionists. I mean, Brad Lander is a liberal Zionist. The
hmm
fact that Brad Lander campaigned with him during the primary is the reason he won the primary.
Yeah.
And so I think Mamdani, um, yeah, his entire campaign really demonstrates, I think, a winning strategy in America, which is, listen, you can have foreign policy differences. Palestine should, of course, be at the forefront of everything we think about, given that like this country has been so instrumental in the genocide of Palestinians.
hmm
But instead of only talking about that, force the hand of those who disagree with you and make it their choice. Do you want to put your liberalism first or do you want to put your Zionism first?
hmm
And a lot of them now, 2 years post genocide, and lots of people will say this is, too late. But nevertheless, a lot of them now, they are choosing liberalism.
hmm
And and we cannot discount the fact that liberal Zionism is kind of the mainstream position in America, if not far right Zionism. So
hmm
like the fact that he did that, the fact that he was like, we can I'm pro-Palestinian, but lots of liberal Zionists literally campaigned for him and like celebrities and stuff. That disarmed that community in some way. And I actually just read on Blue Sky, there's this an Israeli professor who's based in California who I follow. He works on taxation policy. That's irrelevant to this point, but he was like, I just had to have a conversation with my family back in Israel how I would prefer an anti-Zionist one to a sexual predator for mayor. And it's like you're forcing them to make that choice, and you're winning as a result. Instead of, what is it that some of the pro-Palestine left is doing right now? It's giving props to Candace Owens.
Yeah.
Like that is a losing strategy, and this is a winning one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brad Lander is a good example because he very much was, even on the debate stage when it was like still, him and Mamdani and the others, he was like not hostile necessarily because it wasn't like between Cuomo and Mamdani, for example, that's a different thing. But he was saying very clearly, like, I have fundamental disagreements with Mamdani over this and that, and like the whole like globalize the Intifada thing that Brad Lander made, like did lean into like saying this like an anti-Semitic thing and whatnot, but fundamentally still believed that Mamdani was like a decent person who believed in this and that and clearly cared about New York and stuff. There was clearly the fact that Mamdani had a record that could be pointed to, that he didn't even have to do it, of like having a decent amount of time as a 34-year-old, like a decent percentage of that existence, being involved in various like social justice issues for New Yorkers, like in New York City, played in his favor, obviously. And Brad Lander, for me, is a good example as someone who, like, I, of course, would have like fundamental disagreements on many things, but I also saw like just what it was like a month or so ago, like him speaking and saying like we need to he was speaking like he's of course Jewish American. He was speaking like as a Jewish American in that context. He said like we need to reckon with the fact that the Israeli government has committed genocide in Gaza. Whereas like
Yeah.
up until that point, as far as I know, this wasn't a term that he was comfortable using out loud.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, not early enough, and of course, like too late, and of course, all of that. But there has to be something to move the needle, in a
Yep.
certain direction. And clearly, we wanted to we want me, you, and listeners, I think, on this wanted to be moving towards that direction, like just being like just critical of the Israeli state in this fundamental way as a state that has committed genocide, and that being a line that has been crossed. Many people who might still use the term liberal Zionists to describe themselves wouldn't necessarily disagree with that at this point.
Right.
And that is a change. Like I mentioned this many times, but it's relevant to this conversation that 10 years ago I wrote this thesis just on not that related of a topic here on Yiddish and Hebrew, but one of the things I look at is this rift that was occurring at the time, which is in the wake of the 2014 war on Gaza, which at the time was the most brutal one, which of course has been surpassed since. And I'm fairly certain it was Beinat. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain it was him who said something along the lines of like, the Jewish establishment. This term coming out of my mouth sounds weird. I am quoting a Jewish person here. Has for a long time expected young Jewish Americans to basically like choose between liberalism and Zionism. I'm paraphrasing. And what they've been kind of surprised to see is that more and more young people are actually choosing liberalism. And we've seen this like much more significantly in the past couple of years. And that's not nothing. There's a very good argument to be made, like as you said, that maybe he wouldn't have won if were it not for that. At the very least, among other factors, of course. But anyway, the Israel-Palestine angle for me is very important for you as well. And it's something that I found interesting that, and this might be more the UK thing, which we'll get into, but maybe not as much. Because in the UK, of course, we have someone like Zach Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, who is himself also Jewish. And he is among probably arguably the most prominent currently politician in the UK to have called it a genocide as well. That Mamdani was able to maintain that principle of not throwing Palestinians under the bus, basically, while also saying like my priority are New Yorkers. I don't care where they're from. It doesn't matter whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Palestinian, Israeli. It doesn't matter. They're New Yorkers, and that's my priority. Allowed like those two things in many ways, like you said, like to coexist, right? Like allowed more people like that professor you mentioned in California to say like, okay, maybe I'm not that comfortable with this and this and that because whatever, they have certain preconceptions of what that term means or whatever, but he clearly cares about the issues I care about, and I'm gonna prioritize that. And that's
Yeah.
very, very, very significant. And I hope that there's going to be lessons for the UK, but we'll get into that in a bit.
I mean, yeah, I've been saying for more than the past 2 years, but especially in kind of the shock and the trauma of the last 2 years, the urgency of the last 2 years that I don't think we met. We, as in kind of a broader left, a broader pro-Palestinian left. Like, I have been saying, I do not care about what anyone's feelings are about the Zionism question. Like, I don't care if an American Jewish person or an Israeli person has these feelings towards Zionism. I am thinking about how to end this process now, how to mitigate harm right now, which is an ongoing genocide. Therefore, I am not in the game of trying to change people's long-held feelings, religiously inflected, a function of their communities, etc. Like, I'm not interested in having those conversations and setting red lines about like, no, you must say this or else I'm not going to engage with you. No, I care about the outcome, which is I want you to choose Mamdani over the sex pest. I want you to choose your liberalism over your Zionism. I only care about that. And I honestly think like, yeah, I think the left generally like is more comfortable not winning. They generally are more comfortable being outside of power. And there's all sorts of reasons why, if you're in a social movement, social movements by definition are extra institutional. So like there are all sorts of reasons why you might want to stay out of formal politics.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we don't think about power and how to seize it sometimes, and
Yeah.
how somebody like Mamdani being in the, in City Hall in New York City is going to have like actual impacts on Palestinians in that city, as well as all sorts of implications, issues of academic freedom, police brutality, like all sorts of things could stem from him being in that space rather than somebody who is very vehemently anti-Palestinian.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get so frustrated talking about this sometimes because I just feel like I've been talking to a wall for the last couple of years. I feel like it seemed so obvious to me that you force these people to reckon with their own views and focus on the outcomes of like what the politics is going to be before and after, whatever it is you're advocating for. But instead we have like continuous kind of, I don't know, like posturing. Like we're
Yeah.
more interested
Yeah.
in posturing.
I think fundamentally there's a misunderstanding of how people identify themselves and how so the term Zionism is, for our audience, maybe is a straightforward one, a
Yeah.
self-evident one, maybe. I don't know. I can't speak to everyone who's listening to this, but I'm guessing, based on doing this for 5 years. But the term Zionism is also what, Yair Wallah, who's also been a guest here, has described as a zombie category, in the sense that
I mean, we
it
have research
it
on this, right?
yeah, it means
Yeah.
so many different things that are that including fundamentally opposing things to one another. There are people who have called themselves, who use that term to describe themselves, but whose politics on Israel-Palestine are indistinguishable to like 95% maybe of my politics, of my ideals, let's say. But there's also, I learned this not too long ago, of like the differences between something that's salient and something that's not, in the sense that you could have someone who is not at a stage where they are willing to let go of a term that they grew up seeing as not just neutral, but like fundamentally good. It's one
Mhm.
thing to see it as neutral, so you can just let go of it, and like that part of your identity maybe doesn't suffer as much. But it's another thing if it was seen as something that's a term that's fundamentally a good term, that means something good. And the thing that it means usually doesn't even mean what, for example, what I think of, what Zionism has meant to myself, to my family, to all of that, and of course yourself as well. But salience is an important is a useful concept, I think, because it could mean that they are not willing to let that person I'm imagining here is not willing to let go of that term.
Mhm.
Brad Lander, let's concrete, but is willing not to make that the main reason why they would be
Exactly.
voting for someone or against someone. They're
Right.
actually willing to like basically put that aside because there's like 10 other things that are just more urgent and more important to them. And I think the challenge should be for the left or whatever in those situations to make the things that we're very uncomfortable with, to put mildly, or like opposed to, make them less important in a situation. I'm talking like within electoralism.
Yeah, like in
Make them
America in
less
particular.
central. Yes, in
Yeah.
America specifically, yeah. The UK to some extent this could be applied, although it is a different battlefield in that sense.
No, I think that's so
Yeah.
correct. Like identity salience is a major kind of concept in international relations literature, and
Hmm.
when a smart political activist or smart political strategist would then mobilize other identities, like you said, to kind of, for me as a Palestinian and as someone interested in changing the direction of policy, with all of the caveats involved with that. But, I have nothing else to do being a Palestinian American in this country except work on that front. Um, is that I want to mobilize other parts of their identity in order to disarm the one that could be weaponized against me.
Yeah.
And like you said, like we have research, we have polling. There's this scholar named Mira Sukharov that like did polling with, I think, either American or Canadian Jews, and asked them what Zionism meant to them. and it's very broad. And a lot of them, when you add certain things to that definition, they say, "Oh no, that's not what that I mean by that." And of course, there are some people not of course, the vast majority of people who are trying to enter into these discussions about Zionism are using it from a bad faith perspective, with a bad faith strategy, basically trying to get people embroiled in this discussion of, well, if you're saying Zionism is bad, you're saying self-determination for Jews is bad. Therefore, you're an anti-Semite. Therefore, how could you say self-determination for a people is bad? Don't enter into that conversation to begin with, because that's not the discussion at all. Like, don't enter into the bad faith conversation. Just force their politics.
Yeah. The terms of the conversation has already been defined in that situation, and you're not doing much by kind of entering it. You're not, you cannot win it,
Yeah,
because it's not
into a
about
trap.
you're falling into a trap, exactly. Um, yeah, I think there has to be like interesting, hopeful consequences on like other places. Mentioning the UK here, Zach Polanski, as I said, he's the leader of the Green Party. He was elected as leader of the Green Party about a month and a half ago or so, and since then the membership of the party has doubled. And as it happens, he's also, which is not coincidental, I mean, but he's also like has been for a long time pro-Palestine,
Mm.
has called himself an anti-Zionist, which is relevant because he is Jewish, of course, in this context, and calls out the current establishment, i.e., the one led by the Labour Party, for conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The UK, for listeners who don't know, I haven't yet done a specific episode on that. At some point, I will likely do so. Is arguably, maybe after the US, although even then it depends where, the most repressive, well, after Germany as well, the most repressive place to be if you are pro-Palestine. If you say anything related to the proscribed group Palestine Action, you could
Oh
be
yeah, yeah.
arrested, which is literally why I cannot continue what I wanted to say in my head, but people can fill in the blanks because it would be against the law in this country. It's pretty serious. Actually over 1,000 people have been arrested in London alone for having a sign that said, and here I am quoting, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action," end quote. Just for that, and over a disproportionate amount of them have been like elderly people.
Mm.
It's been a nightmare in that sense. And the fact that within that context, within even that environment, we're still seeing a surge in popularity for a party like the Green Party that is led by a Jewish person who is opposing this narrative is not insignificant. In fact, I would say it's very significant. Zach has himself like drawn comparisons between his politics and of course that of Mamdani, and the media has been doing it, including to smear him. And we'll see what happens with that. We'll see whether
Mm.
it backfires or not. The UK and the US are two different places. It's
Right.
not the same. Something happens in New York may not, be applicable in the same way. But it is something that is being talked about in those terms. And the fact that it has been proven in one way in America, with New York City, will inevitably have impact on the UK because the UK is already extremely affected by American politics as it is. So I'm gonna see what happens with that. The thing that, to Zach's credit, and he does go by his first name. I don't know him personally. I met him only once, but he does go by that. He has also said that, like, yes, what Mamdani did have an amazing has an amazing skill at communication, like communication skills, but it wouldn't have worked as well had it not also been for the fact that the policies were good, the policies
Hmm.
were
Hmm.
popular. These were popular policies, and he turned it into an affordability thing. Polanski has clearly said that he's going to do that. They are doing the same. The Green Party are doing that as well, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen with that. I'm like cautiously optimistic that it could work, but of
Hmm.
course we'll see. But yeah, I mean, and we've seen, of course, like in Spain, people are talking about that the impact it could have on politics there, even though they technically already have a center-left government in place. In France, there's a lot of talk on that, and in Germany, there's a lot of talk on that. Those are just the ones that I've been personally following. So
I
the
think there's
momentum is
also,
big, it's not, yeah.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's also kind of an element, uh, of his success has to do with the fact that he connects these things together. Like the affordability issue is because of the billionaire issue, is because of the assault on democracy issue, is because of our foreign policy. You know, like people are excited about Mamdani's campaign because it isn't trying to segment those things. And of course, you're right. Of course, he's focused on, specific New York issues about universal childcare, about free buses, et cetera, et cetera. But
Rent control being
pushed,
a big one as well, of course.
yeah, of course. But when pushed and when discussed, he doesn't shy away from those kind of like structural critiques. And of course, America won't go the way of Mamdani overnight. America is the American political system has these structures that are like inherently problematic. The Supreme Court being one of them, money in politics with Citizens United being another, the way that our representation works. All of these things are long-term issues that like Americans need to solve for in order to get their democracy back. But Mamdani is like a sign that people do want to go down that path, that it is kind of a fight for, this broader system. And he talks about it as a system.
Yeah. I'm thinking of when he was asked something about billionaires and he says, no, I don't believe billionaires should exist. And then immediately start talking about the affordability, the living, the cost of living crisis. Not to let the interviewer dwell upon billionaires as just a class. No, I just don't think they should exist. Also, I'm going to talk about the thing that I was
because this one stems from this other thing.
Yeah. Exactly. The parallel here I can think of is that just a couple of weeks ago, Zach Polanski was interviewed on the Piers Morgan show by Piers, and Morgan was trying to as usual, the way he does things, like do a transphobia. And Polanski was very easily rebutted that. The specific conversation, the specific interview was, do you believe a woman can have a penis?
Can a woman have a penis?
Yes.
And Polanski says yes, but with the current crisis in the NHS, the problem is that they will have a long time before they will be able to get rid of it.
It's going to take them a long time on the National Health Service to get rid of it, but that's another separate problem.
I think we'll leave it on a woman can have a penis.
And so he made it immediately again into a healthcare issue, and the fact that it is, of course, a healthcare issue. It's not a identity issue or whatever.
I think you're lacking nuance and complexity about a pretty complicated
Not really. You couldn't have been clearer. Ask a simple question.
But you're laughing at it, which I think demeans trans people.
Absolutely ridiculous.
What have you got against trans people? Why are you punching down? Why are you not saying
nothing against
the real
trans
problem
people?
in this
I've already
country?
told you that I think trans people...
You sound like you have a huge problem with trans people.
No. It sounds to me like you don't understand what a woman is.
All of this to say that there are so many different ways, better ways to deal with the existing extremely toxic, largely owned by billionaires, whether it's Murdoch or the others, class of people in their media and their politics and their whatever, without playing their game, without throwing trans people under the bus, without throwing random asylum seekers under the bus, all of that stuff. It is actually feasible.
Right?
Or immigrants there, exactly. It is actually feasible.
Because it
doesn't have to be the other way around,
Yeah, it turns out their power, like the power of the media establishment, like the New York Times, and the terms of the debate that they want to have actually has very little to do with what people care about. Very little to do with how people think. It's an echo chamber, which is why there's such a backlash against them, and why they're so easily captured by billionaires, and they're fighting a losing battle. But I don't mean to pivot, but I also want to bring up the cultural politics element of this. Zahrani Mamdani really, he's young, suave, internet savvy.
Are you saying he's young, so that means we're young?
Of course we're young. I refuse to accept that I'm getting older. No, I just mean he played first of all, celebrities were campaigning for him. The Arab influencers in New York, like the subway takes guy, or people who generate content that we're watching, they all kind of helped push his message along and gave him visibility, and I think that also scares the media establishment. It scares the billionaires because it's not something they can control. It's people can just make the content, and people can can, and there is more diversity in who is out there having this cultural conversation, and they can't control that.
Yeah, the fact that the New York Times did not like want him to win didn't stop that from
Mm-hmm.
happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the New York Times is not just like a behemoth in that sense, and within New York, obviously, but it is a global player. It is the biggest or among the biggest papers out there in terms of traffic and whatever. But still, it can just not I'm saying it doesn't matter, but it doesn't have to matter as much.
Right.
A big thing that has happened here, and I know this is someone who's spoken to quite a few people who were or still are like strategists for the Labour Party, is that the leadership has just been duped effectively, which isn't to say that they don't have themselves very right-wing politics. They do in many ways, but they have been persuaded by strategists and the people around them and whatever that what they need to do is address the far right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I agree that you need to address the far right, but you do so by not becoming the far right and by not just emulating their politics and whatnot. But that's precisely what they've been doing here. They've been like dumping, as I said, like throwing people under the bus, especially migrants and asylum seekers. In some cases, like going further on the transphobia train than some Republicans in the US.
Wow.
It's so extreme that it's propelled, as I said, someone like Zach, because a majority, for example, of young women in England and Wales specifically, now support the Green Party versus like Reform, which has like a minority among young women. And by young, in this case, it's under 30. So unfortunately, we don't make the cut.
Well, that's a ridiculous categorization. I'm sorry.
But just to say that, like, the trend, if you look at these polls and if you just say, okay, well, clearly that means that there is an appetite for a politics that is currently being embodied or like represented by the Green Party. But then you just look at like, okay, then what is the current ruling party, which is the one that was voted in after 14 years of conservative rule in the UK, 14 or something years, as effectively the only reason they were voted in is that they are the not conservative party,
Yeah, they're not the
as they
Tories.
like
Right.
they're just not the Tories. But also with a lot of promises on nationalizing certain things and whatnot, which are very very popular politics in this country. They've proceeded in the past year and a half to basically squander all of that. I'm not gonna make this into UK politics, even though I promise I won't do that. The reason I'm bringing this up specifically is that Zach and the Green Party may have not had a fraction of the popularity that they're currently experiencing, and I really think this is going to continue, were it not for the fact that the ostensibly center-left party in the UK, the one that was elected a year and a half ago, didn't spend most of that time after actually winning with a wide majority, with a big majority, just trying to appease the far right, because that is simply not why they were voted into power. They voted in to actually try and fix the damage that was done by the Tories. And that damage is not people coming in on those small boats and all of that. The damage is actually the National Health Service, which is on its knees, and the train system, which is fucked, and all of that stuff. Those are the things that people are, and the cost of living crisis, which is linked to all of that, of course. Those are the things that most people, when they are polled, including Reform voters, Reform being the far right party here, a good chunk of them say that this is about cost of living. And if they're saying this is about cost of living, let's make it into fucking cost of living. I'm not saying it's the only thing we talk about, but this should be like a big priority in the UK in any case. Anyway, the connection to the Mamdani situation here is that this being something that has worked in such a big player city like New York, I think, and maybe I'm just hoping out loud here, is going to have ramifications in this country, especially as the far right party, which is the Reform Party here, has tied itself pretty significantly to Trump and Trump liking them and them being close to, Farage and Trump being buddies and all of that stuff, which may well bite them
backfire.
in the ass.
Yeah.
It could back, the elections are in 4 years, so who knows, by then. But that's just the thing that like it's a gamble for them as well. And that's my point here is that they are also gambling, and let's work on making that as
Yeah.
expensive as a thing, as costly as a gamble of a gamble as possible, because we can.
I mean, that's the thing is that like I think that they want to convince us of the inevitability of their position of fascism. I was asked recently at an event for RVA magazine. It's a Richmond-based magazine here, and they asked me, is authoritarianism inevitable in America? And I was like, it's inevitable nowhere. It's never inevitable. You can always fight. And I think, back to kind of some of the parallels you were talking about in the UK case, like here in the United States, like people recognize that a lot of the immigration system that now Trump is weaponizing was set up under liberals. Was set up, I was protesting 287G agreements between, ICE and local governments and whatever back when I was in college, and that was under the Obama administration. And I mean, the genocide and support for genocide was under Biden, so I think that people absolutely recognize that like the current political establishment is bankrupt. And somebody like Mamdani gives them the reason people get so excited about somebody like Mamdani and go out and vote to this extent is because he's offering an alternative. And in the US, this is a big country. There's lots of potential leaders. It's not a vacuum of leadership. It's the fact that the political establishment has attempted to control like what kind of person can emerge, and they're losing that grip. And yeah, hopefully that has an impact everywhere and helps us in this fight against fascism that definitely is not a sure thing.
No, it's not. They are also very chaotic, very messy. They fight among each other. The Reform Party has had I don't know how many defections since it's in its short existence already. There's just a lot that can be done to like actively make their lives more difficult. Those politicians specifically, the people who are backing them, which isn't the same as the people who say they support them. Those are those are two different types of responses that they deserve. There are lots of people, as I said, there was a recent video on Zach's Instagram page when he went to one of the areas in the UK where I don't remember where, somewhere in the north, where they voted for the Reform Party as their counselors, and he was talking to a bunch of them, including people who did vote for Farage, and they were horrified. The people that they were horrified at some of the policies that Farage himself was putting forward, and. So what you do with that, you can choose to say that like, well, fuck them, they made that decision, that's their problem. You can also read in that the fact that what that means they're not married to the idea of Farage being leader. They are willing to say, oh well, this wasn't the way forward, so okay, we're going to find a different way forward. And I think that the role of the left within the context of electoralism here has to be that like almost easily accessible path, that you can choose, to go back to this point of salience. If a lot of people genuinely believe that someone like the Reform Party will fix the NHS, even though they promise to privatize it, but in terms of the narrative that's going out there with all of the misinformation and stuff, to fix the NHS, to make things better in this very vague way or whatever, to go back to how things were and whatnot. You can choose to see in that, go back to how things were, the racism, and sometimes there is that, of course, but sometimes this is where it gets very messy. It's also mixed into like, well, things were easier economically back then, quote unquote, in the 70s or in the 80s, because as of the 80s, things got worse in many ways. You can choose to you can also basically you can use that to drive a wedge in that discourse, to actually weaken it from within, because we don't have to spend our time debating the Farage people and all of that, but we do have to have kind of I'm mixing up my metaphors here, to have to weaken their grip on the discourse, which they're not in power. And the way the current government and the current party that is in power acts, it's as if they are the ones that are in opposition, and Reform is the one that's in power. And to the point that this can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy if they keep on doing this for 4 years. The good news is I think it's very difficult for them to keep on doing this for 4 years, and there is a way to actually stop it before it gets worse. But we need to accept that the fact that it is, as you said, not inevitable. Did an interview just last year with Elia and Dana, the researcher on the far right, who I don't know if he coined it, but he worked on the populist hype, on the fact very much that the far right is just not inevitable. And we need to just stop taking their own words, their own projected inevitability at face value, because they're just not. They are fallible human beings that make a lot of mistakes, rely on a lot of dark money and fossil fuel in the case of the UK and whatnot, lobbies and shit like that. And those are not things that most people like. And we can use that. We should be using that to our advantage, as Mamdani did. And that worked for him.
Yeah, absolutely. If we articulate a vision, people will come to it. That's the bottom
Enough
line.
people at the very least. Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, enough people, exactly. I mean,
You
of
never
course,
convince 100%.
No, also we don't, like, just to be clear, I'm not saying, reach out to Nazis.
No,
there
no.
are red lines, but
There are absolutely red lines. And that's the point, actually, don't having those red lines. Like, no, this is just a red line. Polanski told, there was a reform guy who on a panel said like, are you calling me a fascist? And Zach's like, yes, because you're the representative of a far-right party that has allied itself with neo-Nazis in the European Parliament when it comes to the Swedish Democrats and stuff.
Oh, that's
so
right.
You can say that. You can actually call them that and do that and whatnot, by still focusing on the things that most people actually care about, which is, how they live and whether they can pay rent and all of that shit. You can actually do both. It's feasible.
Because, neoliberal parties, like the Democratic Party, is like, part of it is they haven't articulated a vision because they don't have a vision.
Yes.
So when you have people like Mamdani, like AOC, that can, message this correctly also, but also stand for something. Like, imagine that. People are mobilized when a candidate stands for something. So let's hope people learn that lesson.
Yep. Okay, well, Dana, I'm feeling optimistic in many ways, genuinely, not just because of the election, but that's been a good addition to that. I have seen and talked to enough people who, okay, I'll put it this way. I spoke to a number recently. I'm not going to say the details because I don't think I can, but I spoke to a number of strategists within the Labour Party, including people who worked with Keir Starmer himself. And I was sort of not amazed, but it took me a bit by surprise at how lost they are as to what to do. They were talking about how the Labour Party is hemorrhaging its popularity, how the Green Party is, as I said, surging in the polls, and how they're not actually gaining a lot of reform committed supporters, because why the fuck would they? And they're sort of lost. So what to do and what not. And I was just amazed to be in a situation where I knew more of certain paths that could be taken and steps that could be taken than the people who have the ear of the Prime Minister of the UK. That kind of just showed me, if you want, that they're just people. They're just people. They're just people who are in a certain situation. They have much more power than I do, of course. But them having more power doesn't actually mean that they know what the fuck they're doing. It just means that them not knowing what the fuck they're doing becomes my problem.
No, exactly. No.
That's what it actually means.
As somebody who lives in proximity to DC, I have long learned that lesson.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't actually know what the fuck they're doing, which is a problem for all of us. So call it out.
All right. Thanks for doing this, Dana, as always.
Yeah, this was great.
ازيك يا باشا؟ كل شيء تمام؟